Welcome to Silence, where we explore the alchemy of disciplines, practices, and beliefs that get us to our best thinking, insights, and creativity. Now, on to the show. All right, Gregory, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thanks for coming in today. So we've got a little tradition that we start with, if you'll indulge me, of just starting with 20 seconds of silence. That for a lot of people, that's the only silence they'll have in the day. So we can collect our thoughts and give those folks listening a quick break, and then we'll dive in. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Good. All right. Well, let's start by who you are. Just background, bio, whatever you want to share. You know, we were saying before we started for my wife and I, we always think any environment would be better with Gregory Lemos there. One of our brightest, funniest, most thoughtful friends. But how would you describe who you are and then where you've been? You've had a pretty illustrious professional career that you can hit on or not, but I'll let you define it.
20-second bio. I am a journalist. I cut my teeth in Washington, D.C. at ABC News, covering Congress and elections, which I enjoyed immensely. We're in Atlanta now, just actually down the street from you.
That's right.
And moved to Atlanta maybe about 7 years ago, and was with CNN for a while doing domestic news. So my journalistic background is in TV news, politics, and most recently domestic news. I'm a mom of 4 kids, and those are probably the 2 most prominent things in my bio.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was thinking about it in the last couple of days, having you on, it's like, gosh, this is a new dynamic, having a professional journalist sitting across from me. So
Yeah.
You'll have to give me some coaching afterwards. Well, as you know, I really wanted to carve out space and time with Silence of just exploring, the alchemy that gets us to our best thinking and creativity and insights and inspiration. And, with this feeling that the world needs better thinking, that we always need to be pushing ourselves ahead. But maybe just to start, give us a sense for, where and when in your life do you feel like you've experienced your best thinking, creativity, inspiration, however you want to define it, and, context, and then we can talk about maybe practices or, what was going on around. But are there moments that stand out, professional or personal, where you're like, gosh, I really felt inspired, or I think about it in terms of elevated thinking, but like that was some of my best thoughts or creativity.
I think creativity in my life is a discipline of being willing to push to the outermost limits of what I believe to be true, which is sort of a lost art in Washington, I would say. But some of the people I really admired covering were people who understood that it's in the space of other people's thinking, trying to deeply understand it. It doesn't necessarily change what you think. In fact, it can strengthen it, I think. But I think it's a combination of being willing to kind of push and allow yourself to stretch into spaces where maybe the outer limits of yourself don't naturally want to go, and then knowing when to pull back and rest, or as they say in yoga, like a shavasana.
Mm-hmm.
I think yoga is actually a really helpful practice in terms of this push and pull. And a lot of times, you can get deeper into a pose by actually just taking a deep breath and relaxing into it. So creativity, I think, lives somewhere in that space of stretching ourselves by different points of view. And that can come through literature or other people or even just in the silence, and then also resting and sort of letting our being metabolize what we've learned. Has it changed something inside of us? Yeah. So I would start there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we could spend our whole time on that. So, because you're hitting on something that I think is at core to this of talk a bit more about the outermost limit. I love that idea. And one of the things that I wanted to get into, and we can talk about it now, is just feeling like, are there enough people pushing the edge with thinking and creativity these days? I do have these concerns of, while the internet and social media have connected us, and there's a lot of good in that, do we all end up at like this same common denominator? You know, does it stifle really pushing and being kind of unique, like this idea of like iconoclast? So anyway, when you're talking about getting to your outermost thinking, and then I want to talk about the rest part, but why is that important? What does that do there? And how do you find it?
Well, again, my perspective is one of a journalist, and my agenda always in journalism has been this belief that we are a democracy and we are first and foremost responsible for educating ourselves. And to answer your question, I think the first part of pushing yourself is to take responsibility that I'm responsible for the diet that I internalize through my eyes and through my brain and my spirit. And, practically just like in this political climate, we're in an election. What I try and do is sort of go out like a rover to both sides in the middle. And I think this binary framing doesn't really fit anymore in our political system, but I try and find voices that challenge what I think. On the Israel-Gaza conflict, I try and find very loud voices on both sides. And then those voices are often not the majority of opinion, and then navigate my way into the middle. So I think the way that we push out to the outermost is we first of all take responsibility for ourselves. And then we engage in a process that feels maybe a little bit like doing a deep squat, with weight on. Like it should feel a little bit uncomfortable. I think what you're talking about everyone sort of finding this sledgy gray middle has to do with just feeding ourselves a diet of what we like, what we agree with, what makes us feel good about ourselves. And it's been said of Bill Clinton, and I'm not saying Bill Clinton was a great president, but something he did do was curate opinions of across the spectrum, and I think that is something that we've lost in our country. And I have friends in the media who, have been told they're not beating the drum loud enough in terms of the very worst of our proclivities as people. There's an incentive, there's a financial incentive, I would say, to sort of stroke that in our culture. And something I wish is that we were more awake to that, as individuals, because it takes away our ability to think freely and therefore operate functionally as a democracy. So, I would end it there.
Yeah. Yeah, the challenge to your perspective. I was talking about this the other day with another guest and feeling like I'm seeing more people calcify. They just are getting like set in what they believe. And I think the only way out is to go find other diverse perspectives that you listen to and then, take away a little something. And it doesn't mean you change all of your opinion on the subject, but it helps round it out. And it does feel like I see less of that, these days in this climate. So,
well, and the dehumanizing that's happened across the political spectrum, where if you don't agree with me, you're some sort of like subhuman category, right?
Right.
And I can feel that rising in myself sometimes when I feel like someone's being particularly vitriolic or hateful or debasing our society with the sludge they're putting out into the atmosphere.
Yeah.
it's just interesting because the whole premise of democracy is that it creates an environment for human flourishing, human flourishing. And so at the base of it has to be this belief that every human is deserving of flourishing. And we are these extraordinarily intricate creations with different socioeconomic backgrounds, different familial history, different genetic makeup. Like there has to be, like when we look at even the diversity of a field of flowers, there has to be room for each blade of grass to have a different vantage point of the sun and for those things to be equally true.
Mm-hmm.
And I read this poem the other day where it talked about setting your dining room table with your nicest china for two. And then the poet said, now tell me, who have you invited to the table, love or fear? And I know that can sound a little woo-woo, but I think in these times where we're negotiating very serious geopolitical issues and economic issues, I actually do think it's a helpful question. And I think I think fear has been invited to the table of a lot of our tables here.
Yes.
Not just in the United States, but across the world.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
And I think fear is why we don't go get those other perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And then fear keeps us from listening and changing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like fear of what? I mean, there are things to be afraid of, but a lot of it is a dark cloud. Often there's not a lot of substance. It's just, I don't know. It's interesting how fear works. That it's more foreboding than it is, real.
Yeah.
Often.
Yeah.
Talk about the rest part. So it was an interesting juxtaposition. So you go stretch yourself on the edge, finding diverse perspectives. But then there's a time to come back. So what does the rest look like when thinking or when considering thinking?
Well, I think specifically in tense conversations, if I'm negotiating a tense conversation, I think a rest can look like a pause where the relationship is affirmed, where that human thing is affirmed between the two people, and just take a breath to hey, I respect you. I like you a lot. We disagree. That's okay. You know what I mean? But in terms of a discipline of rest, which I think you and I can both agree we have lost as a society. And when you look back, our beings are not created, you look at mental health, you look at disease in the modern world. And I think rest is a discipline. And I'll be very honest that my husband and I have been talking about the need for for Sabbath in our life, meaning a day of rest. And it's really hard with soccer schedules and, 4 kids to feed. And, but it's to our harm that we haven't figured it out. So I think in terms of rest, it depends how big or small the rest needs to be. Depends on how big the push has been, and even circumstantial things. I think during the pandemic, we were all at home, but that was exhausting, and none of us could figure out how to rest.
It was not restful.
Yeah. How do you rest in a place where your children are all the time now? And there just was fear everywhere. So I like to engage each morning. I like to get up before the rest of my family is awake, and have a period of maybe 15 minutes of prayer and meditation, just silence, of listening to the silence. I have some thinkers that sort of change as time passes, and then I come back to some of them. But I like to read the thoughts of people who have thought deeply about how to get more seats of love at the table that we're setting.
Seats of love?
Yeah. How they're filling their table with love and not fear. And often these are not people, they're people like William Wilberforce, who lived in very trying, dangerous, times. I find those are actually the best people to listen to, because they're not just, singing Kumbaya from safety.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to read people who both encourage me to grow and can paint a picture of what love looks like in action. And then I like to journal. And have you heard of The Artist's Way, this book?
I've heard of it.
Okay. I read it. It's a 12-week discipline of sort of trying to stretch the limits of your creativity. And she encourages a discipline called morning pages, where you just write 3 pages every morning, and it's not going to be your memoir. I feel like that's what everyone thinks when they sit down to journal is, what if this gets published one day?
And then it gets too stressful and you don't know what to say.
And you don't write. So it's just free flow writing. And I'm often surprised at what comes out during that time, because oftentimes it's not from my prefrontal cortex. It's not even something I've thought about. But that's been a helpful discipline of rest. And then I think for me, like, body work is actually a really important form of rest. It's like an Ironman race every day, having 4 kids. So body work has been really helpful for me too with rest.
Which is what? Movement, yoga, exercise, those kind of things?
Yeah, or like massage. I think cryotherapy can be helpful.
Yeah.
It can just be a cold shower if that's what you have that day,
Yeah.
But I think being an embodied person is also really challenging. And this is the house we live in. So when we're not in it, who's driving? I'm mixing my metaphors here, but I think a sign that I am doing a good job tending to my rest is that I feel embodied. I feel in my body. And things like stress and being on 75 in Atlanta can cause me to leave my body. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way to put it. And yeah, there's so many new, or not new, but yes, the cold plunges and the saunas and the cryotherapies and there's so many new modalities that have become popular. Maybe again, I feel like the ancients probably all knew this and then we forgot it and now it's coming back. But
yes,
that really help. I agree. Hey, talk about, so you said when you journal, often things are coming out and they're not from your prefrontal cortex. Mm-hmm. So without asking for any, too vulnerable specifics, but what's coming out and where do you think it's coming from?
Well, I think usually the thing that surprises me, the 2 things that surprise me are fears that I've sort of just been batting away, and then gratitudes for things that equally I've sort of looked over or taken for granted. And I think those things are like applications that run in the background of your phone that just either increase your battery or decrease it. And so in bringing those things forward from this place, it feels like my being is saying, like, let's look at this. I've often heard that with our negative emotions, that when we suppress them, they actually just get bigger. It's in denying them, it like feeds them. So it's a way of saying, like, come to the table, fear. I see you, anxiety. Come sit at the table. Everything's okay. Did you see Inside Out too?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So like anxiety has a place, right? Like, she's important and she needs to be tended to, or she freaks out more. So it's allowing these, what we would call negative feelings. I don't know that they're negative. I think they're the emotions that we don't like sitting with, but bringing them, letting them move through me, and then elevating gratitude, which I think just feeds on itself. And then you're telling your brain, look for more, and I think that just sets the day up to be looking for the beauty and the little miracles in life rather than everything that's going wrong, which just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking recently about gratitude lists, like starting the day with that posture. And then like something you said, just thinking about like that idea of like shadow work, like when you stuff something down, what's that doing to you? I like the analogy of the phone, it's like an app running in the background that just kind of slows performance. And probably affects my ability, if I'm speaking on this, affects my ability to think at my best. Because I'm being weighed down in the background. And sometimes you don't even know, So journaling, dreams, I feel like sometimes can get you there of stuff that's bothering you, you know, you need to address.
Do you feel like, do you think that all creative acts are risky? Do you think they're inherently risky?
That's a great question. I think so. You know, based on a quick gut response, but I think so. I think you need to take some risk. At least, let's see if I can put this into words. Like we were talking, you know, before we started about Rick Rubin's book, and he's so good in there to push like authenticity, like deep authenticity to who you are. And in that, I think is vulnerability. And that's what people connect to, you know? And what's so amazing about him is, I may be wrong on this, but I don't think he plays music or even reads music. He just knows, it's like he's like a tuning fork, and he knows when his client or band or, you know, musician is like on the mark with their unique voice, which is amazing because he's uber successful, and it's just like he's got the ear for authenticity, which I think, to your question, is often like putting your rawest self out there a little bit, or your truest self, which I think we often protect because we wonder if people will accept it. And so when thinking about art or creativity, yeah, it feels like there's a risk there of rejection. But people connect with that rawness, that vulnerability, that realness. I think realness. And gosh, and this is something I think about, is like we're lacking a lot of realness today. You know, it's hard to find it between social media and living this content age, which is wonderful, and we're doing it today, and I love it, but everybody's worried about their brand and what something looks like or sounds like, or putting their best foot forward, or it can all get, and the more sophisticated we get, it can feel like we're all just being manipulated or optimized. You know, everything's optimized. It's like when I'm getting like optimized marketing messages from my plumber, you know, I'm just like, this is not that plumbers don't have a right to market, but I'm like, golly, this is getting kind of wild out there. And so where's vulnerability? Where's kind of realness and authenticity? So anyway, sorry, long answer to your question, but what would you say about risk and creativity?
Well, I think what I hear you saying, maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, is when we kind of cultivate, when we plant and water and cultivate the seeds of creativity, which it's actually probably, I think there's probably a seed planted in us at birth. I mean, I see this with each of my kids, like they're like in there, you know, and they're so different. And as parents, we're just trying to figure out what nourishments they need to make them grow. And we're sort of like learning what kind of plant they are as they grow, you know? And may all children have parents that are trying to do that, you know, because I think a lot of us didn't get that. And we're sort of trying to figure out at 40 what kind of a plant we are, you know?
Right.
But creativity, I wonder if it could also be another way of saying the authentic expression of who we are, which is inherently risky, right? Because it's not will you get rejected, it's you will get rejected.
Right.
You know, people will say no thank you, or you know, what a weird looking branch, or what an inadequate branch, what a loser of a tree you are, you know. Yeah, I do think so. In creativity, it feels so much more tender than intellectual calculations for some reason. I don't know. I feel like if you criticize my Excel spreadsheet, that feels less hurtful than telling me that my painting is weird.
Yeah.
You know? So I just wonder if what that points to is actually the essence of us is something truer than our brain. The fact that a creative pursuit is more inherently vulnerable, because maybe it's more us than our brain. And I think that most of us walk around like our prefrontal cortex is the most important person in the party of who we are.
Right.
And it's just a participant,
Right.
in a lot of ways. So I think it's because it's the safest thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, my mind's going to, because when I hear creative, I think, art in all its various forms, but I think about entrepreneurs too. Mm-hmm. And, we've got one we know that sits in the office next door, but there's so much that you have to put yourself out there, for so many entrepreneurial pursuits. Mm-hmm. And it's so often a reflection of something you love or believe or want to take a risk on. And
it's so hard because you're saying this is an idea.
Right. Yeah.
And you have to convince people that this
idea is good. And it came from me, probably, or or whoever the entrepreneur is. So
yeah.
Jumping back to your morning practice. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned silence and solitude.
Mm-hmm. If I can get solitude.
Right. If you can get solitude. I was remarking the other day, I need to go back and find the quote, but I think Mother Teresa, paraphrasing, named those two things as kind of her secret weapons. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do those do for you, mean for you? Talk about those two things. Because they're both really rare, I think, today. It's so hard to get it, especially in the season of life that we're both in. Mm-hmm.
Mother Teresa's actually she was a big, her voice was a big influence in my early spirituality. I had a mentor put it to me this way, that silence and solitude is like plugging yourself in to the outlet, It's sort of like electric vehicles. We have to unplug and go out in the world. But if I don't do that, time has taught me I have very little. And I just walk around like a mime, sort of faking it in the world. And then you get to the end of your day, and that thing, I think it's in the silence and solitude that thing that animates us differently as humans comes alive. And so if I don't feed that, when I get to the end of my day, it sort of feels like I kind of missed it today.
It wasn't fully human.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And, we were talking about embodiment earlier. I think it endows it endows me with presence when I can be present with myself. I don't know. It calms. I think there's a neurobiological thing where I think it calms your nervous system. So like, I'm here, I'm present with you. I'm not in fight or flight, so I can actually hear what you're saying and metabolize it internally. And I don't know. I think it probably, like you said, it allows us to human around, like to be an embodied human being. And I'm someone who lives with a deep fear that I'm going to get to the end of my life and be like, oh, you missed it, And I don't know what it is, but I know that practice, it lessens that feeling a lot for me.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm actually getting at something important to being here on this earth right now. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's so grounding. Mm-hmm. I was thinking about this earlier or recently, and I was thinking about, Jesus going away for periods of silence and solitude and what that was. And this is what you said, but in other words it like helps me be real. It helps tune me into the real before I go out into, the day and the world. Mm-hmm. That feels funny because it's like these two invisible things. And then I'm going into a visible world, and yet it grounds me in something that seems to be deeper and truer when I can find some silence and solitude, and then gives me the right perspective on the day I think that's the thing. If I just move into my day, odds are high that I'm just reacting. I'm being emotionally reactive. Even if it's not a bad day or I haven't done anything stupid, but I'm being blown about by the winds and the seas, and I just don't have an anchor. But even just a little bit of time in silence and solitude can kind of give me the right bearing for the day, because the storms will come, but hopefully I'm not, knocked off course too far.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's different language out there now that we actually can direct our lives, that we're not, of course there's so much we can't control, but I think it also allows us time to remember that we're the boss of ourselves and that our brain actually does respond. Dr. Daniel Amen, his first name is Daniel, right? Dr. Amen. He's a brain doctor, and he talks so much about like being bossy with your brain and telling it, this is what you're going to focus on. And I think silence and solitude allows a time to sort of like get our brain on board with what our values are. And for me, for a long time, but kindness is a really important value, being kind, and kindness is not weakness, is something I learned in Washington. It's actually a sign of deep internal strength and character. Being able to turn the other cheek or go, gosh, I wonder what happened to you when someone cusses you out for no reason, Even with my children, I think that time in the morning allows me to remember what matters to me and then drive the day from that place. Like you said, instead of getting blown around, intentionality, some people call it manifesting, some people call it prayer. But I think across a lot of religious disciplines that seems to move the needle for people, those two disciplines. So through millennia. So I think it's a good one.
There was something you said that sparked the thought. I was seeing if I could get it back, but
yeah.
It's gone. It'll come back. Anything else on either your morning practice or areas or opportunities where you find silence and solitude? Another angle on this is just in this age of constant information. Mm-hmm. Are there other practices you have to carve out that space
of silence and solitude?
Mm-hmm.
Well, something I learned in Washington, and even in covering the pandemic with CNN and all the racial unrest, and just it was a crazy news cycle during the pandemic, despite the lockdowns and sort of the world stopping, is you can tuck away and find solitude no matter where you are. I could find it in the middle of a newsroom. And I think the gift that keeps on giving with the practice of solitude is it continues to feed self-awareness, which then is like a watchman that tells you, hey, like you need to take a beat,
Yeah.
So I would just say, like, reminding myself and everyone that silence and solitude can be practiced with other people.
Yeah.
And I find that collective silence and solitude with friends, I call that prayer, not one where everyone's just talking and trying to sound good, but actually listening and responding. I found that to be a discipline. Silence and solitude have to have a communal counterpoint, I think. Maybe there are people that are called into spiritual solitude. But even someone like Richard Rohr, who I know you enjoy reading, he talks about, even as a priest who practices solitude regularly, that he needs to be with other people. it's the balance and the force, as they say in Star Wars. So, I would just say collective solitude and or call-in response is really important too. Being known in the places you're journeying in your silence and solitude, I think, is an enormously important thing in being human also. Yeah. We can't just be quiet and then go out into the world and then come home and be quiet again. There's a witnessing that happens in the silence and solitude with ourselves, and for me, with my Creator, that I think needs to happen to a certain extent with community as well.
Yeah.
That generative, collaborative, affirming energy that can only happen in community.
Yeah.
I'd say.
Well, you hit on something too, is, there's audible silence, but something I've been thinking about lately is silence of the mind and of the heart. Mm-hmm. Of the heart, maybe one angle on it is like silencing emotions, mm-hmm. Being emotionally regulated. I just went through this course with our friend Pepper Bullock at Academy Within, talking about emotional self-awareness. Mm-hmm. And I realized, oh my goodness, I'm going through my days often being driven by these emotions that are, a bit like ghosts, but they've got the bit and bridle in my mouth. Mm. And if I don't stop to pause and recognize, I'm responding to people based on, like we were saying earlier, but some of these things that have been stuffed down, and sometimes they're not that far down. It was something that happened yesterday. It's still bothering me, and mm-hmm. it's in the background playing, and it really affects. So silencing my heart, so to speak, or at least being aware, and then with my mind, in this season of life, often it's when I'm trying to go to sleep, or I wake up in the middle of the night, and my mind is just running a million miles a minute. I can't stop it, and I've kind of tried everything I know to do with different levels of success, but to quiet my mind. And to your point earlier, you can't listen if your mind and heart are full of other things. Mm-hmm. It's like Mother Teresa said, it's like God can't fill me if I'm already full mm-hmm. of really myself. Mm-hmm. And so, I can't take in other perspectives. I can't really relate well to somebody if I've got my monkey brain going a million miles a minute, or my heart or center of emotion, wherever that would be. But, being loud. So how do I quiet those two things? Mm-hmm. To then really be present in community, with friends and family and others. So, mm-hmm. and sorry, I thought about, or I remembered the thought that occurred to me earlier, which still is applicable, but just this idea of like ego, self, and the silence and solitude can help me put that in check. I was reading, I think, the Message version of one of the scriptures that popped up on my app or something the other day, but, and it was juxtaposing like God and self, and it's like, who am I thinking about today as I go out into the world? Mm-hmm. And almost painting God as, or there was an inference to like thinking about other people, Mm-hmm. And the ego can get so loud, or my ego can get so loud.
Yeah. Totally. I heard someone say the other day, and I wish I could remember who it was, but, you know who it was? It was Brad Malden, a friend of ours.
Yeah.
Where he was talking about how the place we want to live, and it's elusive, is to not think too much of ourselves or to think not enough of ourselves. And I think a lot of times those thoughts at 3 a.m. come from they hinge on stories whose energy, the underpinning of those stories is we think too much of ourselves. Like, I can't believe he said that to me. Or we think too little of ourselves, where we're like, I can't believe I said that.
What an insight.
Yeah. When he said it, I was like, oh my goodness, that space is elusive. I tend to be someone who thinks too little of myself. Mm. And that's not a virtuous thing, Mm-mm. It's really not any more virtuous than, being a pompous person who thinks too much of themselves. So Do you find, like when you were doing the emotional regulation workshop, do you find that it's like the same few emotions you're pulling from, or is it more schizophrenic?
Yeah, I wish I had it. They gave me one of the emotion wheels, where there's like a gazillion emotions.
Yeah.
It's like the new paint wheels. You're like, I didn't know there was that many shades of, purple. But they quit. Well, and then if we want to go on another rabbit trail, they probably tie into personality, Enneagram, Myers-Briggs,
Totally.
DISC, all that stuff with me. I have some predictable ones that I go to, because of how I'm wired. But for me personally, it's often fear, anger. Like I am a high D, Enneagram 1, high control, perfectionistic. That's how I'm wired. Some days it serves me well. A lot of days it doesn't. But I'm coming to peace with it. But that means that I'm either fearful that I wasn't perfect or something wasn't perfect, or I'm angry because something is out of my control, which that's a hard one to have because most of life is out of your control. So it's those two. But one of the great ahas was like, from what place are we operating in a day? And there was kind of this, bell curve really. And there was there's a small piece of it that you're operating out of your best self, probably that point of balance, I'm not thinking too highly, but I'm confident and I'm being powered by good emotion. And then there's, the middle of the bell curve, it's just kind of a mix. And then there's this other side, which I can't remember the name of, but it's like your worst self. And it was a real aha that there's been some really poignant moments in my other job, my professional career, where I've operated out of less than great emotions. And often those were, I think in both cases it was fear. And just the cascading effect that went into the world, namely my staff, what they felt. And it was like talking about tuning fork. It was like, it was out of balance. You could just, and it was all from a belief, an emotion that then I transmitted out. And talk about bad thinking, it was bad. It was, and it was okay in the end, but it caused bad waves. So I really have to be aware of what emotional state, because I'm more high highs and low lows. I have some friends that are always evenly regulated, and I think, how do you do that? It's amazing. God, I love being your friend,
They're so boring. Though.
Yeah.
My husband is one of those.
They're not as exciting. Yeah.
Do you ever get mad? Like he doesn't.
Yeah.
But I think that those insights are so hard fought. It's like blood, sweat, and tears when you recognize how much fear or is driving you. And then it's so hard to take responsibility that impacts other people. I feel like that's like the real cringe thing when you're like, ooh, and that didn't just stop with me. It does have ripples in our lives. And I think probably the impact on other people is what keeps a lot of people from actually being willing to be honest. Although I think it is true that probably the saddest thing is that it keeps us from being fully alive in our own lives when we're held by fear. But the question I had, and maybe you don't want to talk about this on a podcast, but I'm always so curious once you get to that deep level of seeing that like these negative feelings are driving you. It's the next question. Like, and then what happens if you fail? Like, what's the belief? Like, are you abandoned? Are you humiliated publicly? Like, to me, like that, it's like an even deeper question that it hides the answer to that question, but it actually has the most energy in our stories,
Yeah.
What
would you say? I think that is the question.
Yeah. Like for me, what's at the bottom?
Yeah. Well, yeah. How do you, the next question or the next step?
Well,
how do you get there and then what do you do with it?
Yeah.
I guess is what I'm trying to get to.
It's, just got to keep getting down and deep into those
Down in the
hamstrings and those, those squats. I think for me, there's this fear of abandonment underneath it all. And I'm an Enneagram 3. I have some childhood trauma. I mean, there's empirical reasons, and then I think there's just everybody struggles with these fears at the base of us. That probably would have been really hard for me to say 10 years ago, and I've just realized now that everybody's afraid of the same things deep down. Yeah. And then we think nobody else is, and so we don't tell anybody. And then here we have our dysfunctional society because we're all parading around like things we're not.
It's crazy. We're like a bunch of crazy people. Yeah.
I think that's why people find so much healing in these 12-step rooms. Yeah. Because you just come in and you're like, hello, I'm Gregory, and I am a really screwed up person. Yeah. It's like the most honest, and I'm also a profoundly beautiful person at the same time. It's both. And it's in that binary, I'm either all bad or all good, like we were talking about earlier. Like we were created for more nuance. We can hold more nuance than that in ourselves and in each other. So what do I do with it? Once I can say that, like, gosh, I'm afraid of being abandoned. Like if I don't crank this story out and get it perfect, in my industry, we were told we have to play error-free ball. Every day we were told that. And it does matter. If you put a semicolon in the wrong place, your credibility falls apart, And
lawsuits can be filed. I remember reading some of these stories,
Yeah. I mean, when you publish something or put something on TV, like it lives forever, But I just think in being so honest, it then allows me to get to the place where I can actually identify what I need, which so often is the silence and solitude, to be restored, to bathe in the truth that I'm not alone, or to reach out to friends and just say, oftentimes it's a text. Guys, I'm feeling unlovable. I'm feeling like if I screw up, every person I've ever loved is going to reject me and send me to Siberia. Right. Right. And it's just ridiculous.
It's worst case scenario.
It's almost like when you say it out loud, it loses all of its power. Right. Even if it doesn't. I just think if we never admit we're hungry, how can we be fed? When we're all walking around pretending like we don't need to be fed. Like we're vulnerable little flecks of dust floating around in a giant universe. Like we're needy. We're inherently vulnerable. And like you said, I think that's where the realness in life begins. And we can build from that place that we're also magnificently resilient. We are also these other things. But it's in the denial that it's like we never even can get to the starting line of real work, of real relationship, of really living. So,
one thing that's continued to play in the background for me is, watching one of these news reports about interviewing, I don't know, octogenarians, but, folks that are at the end of what would they change? What was their biggest regret? And at least in the one I saw, or maybe a couple that I saw, it was, I wish I'd taken more risk. And I've thought about that so much, in the last, 5-ish years, maybe a little bit more. But I feel like I played a little bit of conservative ball for a lot of my life.
Yeah.
And more, I want to take risks. It's like I can now see, like, gosh, life is short. I understand now what everybody was talking about. And in midlife, hopefully I've got a lot of years left, but you start thinking like, well, how many years do I have with my kids? How many years do I have left, or at least when they're young and want to hang? How many years left do I have with my spouse or in my professional career? It's like, I've got some things I want to do, and I've got to start knocking down these fears and taking risks, and to heck with the consequences. Now, I'm doing it in a bite-sized way. I'm still who I am, but to your point, it's like, we got to start pushing through some of this. We meaning, talking to myself, like we got to start challenging some of these things and taking some risks to do some stuff that we want to do. And, we'll accept what comes. And then, you alluded to this too, is like, what's on the other side of these fears? Well, maybe it's not the other side. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but it's like, it's faith. That's the antidote to my fear. Now, faith in what? No, that's different for different people. faith in humanity, faith in my friends and family, faith in my God, faith that it will be okay, even when things aren't okay. You know, what's that look like? But I've been playing with this, you know, of like, how can I take more risk, thoughtful risk? I don't want to be, what's not my personality to be too crazy, but yeah, you know, it's like, I'm getting old. I want to tackle some of these things and see what's beyond it. And then often there's such a rich reward when you push through, a freedom, and at least internally, even if the external, result isn't what I wanted. But sorry, you were gonna.
I was just gonna. You answered what I was gonna. I was gonna ask you, like, why risk? And I think you just answered it. I mean, for you, is that what you would say? You just have found greater freedom internally?
Yeah.
Through the process?
Yeah, freedom and peace.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like when you knock down one fear and you see the benefit, you want to then knock down the next one. But it's like the little Russian eggs in reverse or something. It's like they seem to get bigger, It's like I knocked down a little one, but then there's another one. But that little one gave me courage enough to maybe tackle the next one, and then the next one. And yeah, it's been one of the more rewarding things, I'd say, of middle life, tackling some of these fears.
And I'll just say, like, it's pretty remarkable for you to be taking risks like you have in midlife, because that's when we start to wake up and realize our bodies are changing. They don't recover like they did. We've got people, some of us have little people that are relying on us. We've got spouses. The stakes feel higher in midlife to fail. It feels like the ground is getting farther away. So I think it's amazing to take risks in midlife that you have. Because it does feel scarier, And I think that's why you meet a lot of people in their 70s, and they're sort of, like you said, they're like fully calcified.
Right.
Oh, I've been doing it this way forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that actually just speeds up the decay that comes for all of us at some point. So
where do you, I know we just have a minute or two left, maybe two final questions. One, where do you feel like you're on the edge? What feels risky in your life right now? Or maybe something that you want to pursue, haven't started yet, but like, I see this risk, I want to take it. Or I'm experiencing this now and it feels risky, but there's an aliveness to it,
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned before, I'm an Enneagram 3, and so I'm kind of hardwired to compete and achieve. And motherhood has been a season where a lot of my metrics for success are not available to me. And the risk for me has been in leaning into that. And believing that wisdom for me looks like saying, I planted that seed and I'm watering it, and it is going to grow. I just can't see it right now. There will be a reward. There will be a vineyard here in this field that looks barren right now. So I would say that feels like a growth edge to me. I would say internally, like I'm, and in my community, I'm working on just being more honest with how I'm doing, with what I'm feeling, with what I'm thinking. And also, like, we've talked a lot about non-duality in the last hour. Like, I think I'm trying to hold a liminal space in my life now where I can be, for example, both over here as a stay-at-home mom in this moment, and also a driven, competent professional who wants to be back engaged in a meaningful way in her career at some point. It's being willing to hold that uncomfortable yoga pose and just know that sometimes it's in the tension that we really are growing. So I would say in those two places, and just trying not to be as black and white or as externally focused as I've been, maybe as you talked about, like maybe through our 20s and 30s. That was an important part of establishing ourselves. But I find in this decade that I'm more interested in what the discomfort is teaching me, what the gray is communicating. And just one other thing I'd say that I think is worth mentioning is this. I have a little, we call it our Ladies Politics Night, where we curate content.
It's the power group. You guys should be running the country. Yeah.
From across every, as diversified a, portfolio of points of views as we can. And we get together and we talk about it. And I love the discipline of holding space for opinions I don't understand. A lot of the time it's just that I don't understand. And when you talk to people, you see that there's a story, and that oftentimes it is really thoughtful how they've come to this conclusion. And then you love them and you respect them, even though you don't agree with them. So I would just say continuing to hold space for conversations like that have been really important, and staying flexible in a time where it feels easy to be afraid or put my head down in the sand. I still am very politically interested, and I read the news every day and all day. But I want to stay full of integrity and peace inside myself, even as I engage with that content, which can be the only way I've found is to continue to consider other points of view and not be driven by fear. So that group has really helped me.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
One image that came to mind is, it feels like this first half of life, it was about, and I'm stealing all these ideas from, other people, Roar and others, but this first half of life, it's like constructing your ego, like who you are, what's important, what have you done.
Yes.
And it's like climbing this mountain. And then the second half is like giving that ego away,
Yes.
It's like still knowing who you are, but putting it in service of others.
Yeah.
Which I think I hear some of that in what you're saying,
I love that you said that, because I think that more succinctly, I think the growth edge for me is allowing my ego to be deconstructed. And there's plenty of opportunity. I can't run like I used to. I can't, my brain is foggy from all the tabs that are open all the time. Like it's right there if you'll just open your eyes. And I think we get weird through the decades when we brace against our ego.
Yeah.
It wants to deconstruct. And so I'm trying to surrender to that process and see the beauty in it. And set my eyes on the elders who have gone before me, who have done that, and I think look so beautiful in their 70s and 80s, or even through the eyes of history. So yeah, I love that you said that, because that says it better than I was trying to say it. Yeah,
well, I don't know about that, but a death before death, and then you can see when the folks that don't want to let their ego die, it becomes like glaringly apparent. The older they get. Yeah. So
I got to meet a lot of those people in Washington. It's actually a career choice you could pick.
You could go spend time with them.
Yeah.
All right. Well, finally, an encouragement, challenge, recommendation for everybody listening as you part, something to leave them with.
I would just encourage your listeners to look at how they treat other people, and to really think about it. Because I would say it's such important data on what's happening internally, what you are doing to yourself. And I think we're created to love and be loved. And if that is not the fruit of your life, I do think you're missing it to some degree. And I long for a world where we're all working on that. Like I think the whole fabric of our society would change if we had that orientation. So that might sound woo-woo, but I do think it comes down to, I saw this meme that said the way you talk to the computer operator when you're on hold is the real you.
Oh no, I'm in trouble. Yeah.
That's my advice. How do you talk to the Delta? Like, I'm sorry, I didn't understand you. I think there's probably an invitation to like deep work for all of us in that interaction. So, and I would just say like curate different points of view, different friends that have. I just think we're missing out on so much of the beauty of life when we silo ourselves into people who agree with us and we only take in. I mean, if I let my kids pick their dinner every night, it would be potato chips and hot dogs, and they would not live a full life. And I would say with food, the same is true for what we're putting in our spirits and in our minds. And we need a diverse plate of perspectives and people and backgrounds to be well-nourished as people and continue to move our society forward in ways that make life a wonderful experience for everyone. So now I sound like I'm giving an answer on the Miss America pageant. So world peace.
Not true. Well said. Gregory, thank you so much for your wisdom and time today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so inspired at your ability to keep risking, your willingness. I think it's awesome. So.
Thank you.